A reading from St. John Cassian's Institutes on Pride, Part 1. Chapter 1. How our eighth combat is against the spirit of pride and of its character. Our eighth and last combat is against the spirit of pride, which evil, although it is the latest in our conflict with our faults, and stands last on the list, yet in the beginning and in the order of time is the first. An evil beast that is most savage and more dreadful than all the former ones, chiefly trying those who are perfect, and devouring with its dreadful bite those who have almost attained the consummation of virtue. Chapter 2. There are two kinds of pride, and of this pride there are two kinds. The one, that by which we said that the best of men and spiritually minded ones were troubled. The other, that which assaults even beginners and carnal persons. And though each kind of pride is excited with regard to both God and man by a dangerous elation, yet that first kind, more particularly, has to do with God. The second refers especially to men. Of the origin of this last and the remedies for it, we will, by God's help, treat as far as possible in the latter part of this book. We now propose to say a few things about that former kind, by which, as I mentioned, those who are perfect are especially tried. Chapter 3. How pride is equally destructive of all virtues. There is, then, no other fault which is so destructive of all virtues, and robs and despoils a man of all righteousness and holiness, as this evil of pride, which, like some pestilential disease, attacks the whole man, and, not content to damage one part or one limb only, injures the entire body by its deadly influence, and endeavors to cast down by a most fatal fall and destroy those who were already at the top of the tree of the virtues. For every other fault is satisfied within its own bounds and limits, and though it clouds other virtues as well, yet it is in the main directed against one only, and specially attacks and assaults that. And so, to make my meaning clearer, gluttony, i.e., the appetites of the belly and the pleasures of the palate, is destructive of strict temperance. Lust sustains purity, anger destroys patience, so that sometimes a man who is in bondage to some one sin is not altogether wanting in other virtues, but being simply deprived of that one virtue which in the struggle yields to the vice which is its rival and opposed to it, can to some extent preserve his other virtues. But this one, when once it has taken possession of some unfortunate soul, like some most brutal tyrant, when the lofty citadel of the virtues has been taken, utterly destroys and lays waste the whole city, and leveling with the ground of vices the once high walls of stainlessness, and confusing them together, it allows no shadow of freedom henceforth to survive in the soul subject to it. And in proportion as it was originally the richer, so now will the yoke of servitude be the severer, through which by its cruel ravages it will strip the soul it has subdued of all its powers of virtue. Chapter 4. How, by reason of pride, Lucifer was turned from an archangel into a devil, and that we may understand the power of its awful tyranny, we see that that angel who, for the greatness of his splendor and beauty, was termed Lucifer, was cast out of heaven for no other sin but this, and pierced with the dart of pride, was hurled down from his grand and exalted position as an angel into hell. If then pride of heart alone was enough to cast down from heaven to earth a power that was so great and adorned with the attributes of such might, the very greatness of his fall shows us with what care we who are surrounded by the weakness of the flesh ought to be on our guard. But we can learn how to avoid the most deadly poison of this evil if we trace out the origin and causes of his fall. For weakness can never be cured, nor the remedies for bad states of health be disclosed, unless first their origin and causes are investigated by a wise scrutiny. For as he, Lucifer, was endowed with divine splendor and shone forth among the other higher powers by the bounty of his Maker, he believed that he had acquired the splendor of that wisdom and the beauty of those powers with which he was graced by the gift of the Creator, by the might of his own nature, and not by the beneficence of his generosity. And on this account he was puffed up, as if he stood in no need of divine assistance, in order to continue in this state of purity, and esteemed himself to be like God, as if, like God, he had no need of anyone, and trusting in the power of his own will, fancied that through it he could richly supply himself with everything which was necessary for the consummation of virtue, or for the perpetuation of perfect bliss. This thought alone was the cause of his first fall, on account of which, being forsaken by God, whom he fancied he no longer needed, he suddenly became unstable and tottering, and discovered the weakness of his own nature, and lost the blessedness which he had enjoyed by God's gift. And because he loved the words of ruin, with which he had said, "I will ascend into heaven," and the deceitful tongue, with which he had said of himself, "I will be like the Most High," and of Adam and Eve, "You shall be as gods," therefore shall God destroy him forever, and pluck him out, and remove him from his dwelling place, and his root out of the land of the living. Then the just, when they see his ruin, shall fear. They shall laugh at him and say, what may also be most justly aimed at those who trust that they can obtain the highest good without the protection and assistance of God. Behold the man that made not God his helper, but trusted the abundance of his riches and prevailed in his vanity. Chapter 5. That incentives to all sins spring from pride. This is the reason of the first fall, and the starting point of the original malady, which again, insinuating itself into the first man through him who had already been destroyed by it, produced the weaknesses and materials of all faults. For while he believed that by the freedom of his will and by his own efforts he could obtain the glory of deity, he actually lost that glory which he already possessed through the free gift of the Creator. Chapter 6. That the sin of pride is last in the actual order of combat, but first in time and origin. And so it is most clearly established by instances and testimonies from Scripture that the mischief of pride, although it comes later in the order of combat, is yet earlier in origin and is the beginning of all sins and faults. Nor is it, like other vices, simply fatal to the virtue opposite to it, in this case, humility, but it is also at the same time destructive of all virtues. Nor does it only tempt ordinary folk and small people, but chiefly those who already stand on the heights of valor. For thus the prophet speaks of this spirit. His meat is choice, and so the blessed David, although he guarded the recesses of his heart with the utmost care, so that he dared to say to him, from whom the secrets of his conscience were not hid, Lord, my heart is not exalted, nor are my eyes lofty, neither have I walked in great matters, nor in wonderful things above me. If I was not humbly minded, and again, he that works pride shall not dwell in the midst of my house. Yet as he knew how hard is that watchfulness, even for those that are perfect, he did not so presume on his own efforts, but prayed to God and implored his help, that he might escape unwounded by the darts of this foe, saying, Let not the foot of pride come to me. For he feared and dreaded falling into that which is said of the proud, God resists the proud. And again, for everyone that exalts his heart is unclean before the Lord. Chapter 7. That the evil of pride is so great that it rightly has even God himself as its adversary. How great is the evil of pride that it rightly has no angel nor other virtues opposed to it, but God himself as its adversary. Since it should be noted that it is never said of those who are entangled in other sins that they have God resisting them. I mean, it is not said that God is opposed to the gluttonous, fornicators, passionate, or covetous, but only to the proud. For those sins react only on those who commit them, or seem to be committed against those who share in them. But this one has more properly to do with God, and therefore it is especially right that it should have him opposed to it. Chapter 8. How God has destroyed the pride of the devil by the virtue of humility, in various passages in proof of this. And so God, the creator and healer of all, knowing that pride is the cause and fountainhead of evils, has been careful to heal opposites with opposites, that those things which were ruined by pride might be restored by humility. For the one says, I will ascend into heaven, Isaiah 14:13. The other, my soul was brought low, even to the ground. The one says, and I will be like the Most High. The other, though he was in the form of God, yet he emptied himself and took the form of a servant, and humbled himself and became obedient unto death. Philippians 2:6-8. The one says, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. The other, learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart. Matthew 11:29. The one says, I know not the Lord, and will not let Israel go. Exodus 5:2. The other, if I say that I know him not, I shall be a liar like you. But I know him and keep his commandments. John 8:55. The one says, my rivers are mine, and I made them. The other, I can do nothing of myself, but my Father, who abides in me, he does the works. The one says, all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them are mine, and to whomsoever I will give them. Luke 4:6. The other, though he were rich, yet he became poor, that we, through his poverty, might be made rich. 2 Corinthians 8-9. The one says, as eggs are gathered together which are left, so have I gathered all the earth. And there was none that moved the wing, or opened the mouth, or made the least noise. Isaiah 10:14. And the other, I have become like a solitary pelican. I watched and became as a sparrow alone upon the roof. The one says, I have dried up with the sole of my foot all the rivers shut up in the banks. Isaiah 37:25. The other, Cannot I ask my Father, and he shall presently give me more than the 12 legions of angels? Matthew 26:53. If we look at the reason of our original fall and the foundations of our salvation, and consider by whom and in what way the latter were laid and the former originated, we may learn, either through the fall of the devil or through the example of Christ, how to avoid so terrible a death from pride. Chapter 9. How we too may overcome pride. And so we can escape the snare of this most evil spirit, if in the case of every virtue in which we feel that we make progress, we say these words of the Apostle, "Not I, but the grace of God with me, and by the grace of God, I am what I am." 1 Corinthians 15:10. And it is God that works in us both to will and to do of his good pleasure. Philippians 2:13. As the author of our salvation himself also says, "If a man abide in me, and I in him, the same bears much fruit. For without me you can do nothing." John 15:5. And unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that build it. Unless the Lord keeps the city, the watchman wakes but in vain. And vain is it for you to rise up before light. For it is not of him that wills, nor of him that runs, but of God that has mercy. Romans 9:16. Chapter 10. How no one can obtain perfect virtue and the promised bliss by his own strength alone. For the will, and of course no one, however eager and anxious, is sufficiently ready for him, while still enclosed in the flesh which wars against the spirit, to reach so great a prize of perfection and the palm of uprightness and purity, unless he is protected by the divine compassion, so that he is privileged to attain to that which he greatly desires, and to which he runs. For every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and comes down from the Father of lights. For what do you have which you did not receive? But if you have received it, why do you glory as if you had not received it? Amen.